Hey y'all, it's Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to the first Victober video of 2021. This is my Victober TBR. I really cannot believe that we are already back at Victober, but I am so excited about it. I know for me, as well as probably for many of you, I have been planning this year's Victober TBR since Victober of last year. And if you don't know what Victober is, it is a readathon hosted by three lovely booktubers, Kate Howe, Katie from Books and Things, and Lucy from Lucy the Reader. I will link to their channels and their announcement videos down below. And essentially the goal of this readathon is just to read Victorian literature in the month of October. So there are some prompts always involved, but the ultimate goal is just to get you to read Victorian literature. So if you read one Victorian classic in the month of October, you are participating in Victober. My TBR is, as always, incredibly ambitious. So we will see what all I get to this year and what all I don't. But I do have some things that I would really like to make a priority, including some rereads. I think I essentially have 2 or 3 books per prompt. So basically I just really wanted to make sure that I have options for every prompt. The first prompt I have written down is Katie from Books and Things. And her prompt this year is to read a Victorian novel that is set either in the city or in the country. And you can actually double up on this prompt and do one that is set in the country and one that is set in the city. And I decided to focus on the city this year. I do think that feels supremely Victorian to me, but there are other books on my TBR that I think would fit pretty well for the country side of the prompt. 2 of my big rereads are going to go underneath this prompt. And so the first of those is Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I've gone back and forth on which Charles Dickens book I really wanted to put on my TBR this year. I knew I wanted to put at least one, and so I do have 2. They both go for this prompt. But when I was really just thinking about Victober, when I think about Victober vibes, when I think about this time of year, in fact, and how cozy it is, the autumnal weather, the colors, I just think of Great Expectations. And Great Expectations is the first Charles Dickens book I ever read, and it's also the first book that I ever read for a Victober. So my first Victober, I read Great Expectations, and I fell in love with it. I've been wanting to reread it for a while, but I've kind of talked myself out of it because I have so many books of Dickens's left on my TBR, but I just can't resist it. I really think this book would work well for nearly all of the prompts this year, and it's one that I'm going to encourage you all to pick up. If you have never picked up Great Expectations, it is such a phenomenal piece of work. So this is one that I really hope that I get to reread this year. I'm really looking forward to it. Another book that I really hope to reread this year that I think fits pretty well underneath this prompt and also kind of falls under the city side of things is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I felt this calling to me for a very long time, and I just feel like this is the year to reread it. And I feel like this is the perfect time of year to reread it. So this one is not all that long. I think this is one that I'm going to be able to sneak in pretty well. So this is one of my favorite books of all time. I have a real fondness for it, but it's one that I probably haven't revisited in maybe 10 or 15 years. I read this when I was very young, and so I do think it will hold up for me, and I really expect to still love it the same. So I'm curious to see how my perspective has changed and whether I have become a really different reader in the years since I read it for the first time. I know that to be true. I have definitely changed as a reader in the past 10 years, but I think the things that drew me to Dorian Gray in the first place are still there. Last but not least, for this first prompt, for something that is set in the city, I have decided to go for another Charles Dickens, and that is The Old Curiosity Shop. I was really torn between this and Little Dorrit, and I'm still going back and forth on it. I felt like I had quite a few tomes on this list and quite a few books in general that I really wanted to give priority to, and I know that Little Dorrit is quite long, so that's one that I went back and forth on quite a bit, and I settled on The Old Curiosity Shop. I know this is a very contentious book among Dickens fans, and some people really love this one and some people really don't. I'm curious to see how I will fall on it, but I've always felt like I would probably really love this. I've always had a very good feeling about this. It is also not quite as long as I expected, so hopefully that means there's a good chance that I really can get to this month. This is a pretty high priority for me. Next up is Kate's challenge of reading a sensation novel, and y'all know this was my favorite prompt this year because really, essentially, my entire TBR could be made up of sensation novels, and I would be very, very happy with it. So I was quite torn on this one. I always want to read a Wilkie Collins in Victober. So the Wilkie Collins that I'm going to be reading this year is The Dead Secret. And this is set in Cornwall and is about a woman who died giving a secret to her maid. And then years later, her daughter finds out what it is. And so this seems to be very typical Wilkie Collins, but I believe this actually came out prior to The Woman in White, and The Woman in White is often talked about as one of the first sensation novels. So I don't know that I can really designate this a sensation novel, but I am just gonna cheat a little bit and call it a sensation novel. Another sensation novel that is on my TBR this year is Desperate Remedies by Thomas Hardy. I know this is one that a lot of people struggle with. A lot of Hardy fans really struggle with this one, but I've often heard it compared to The Woman in White, and a lot of people have said if you enjoyed The Woman in White and if you just enjoy Wilkie Collins generally, then you will probably really enjoy this book. So I do think this will work really well for me, and hopefully it marries the things that I really love about Thomas Hardy with the things that I really love about Wilkie Collins. So I'm really excited to try this year. I do have a really good feeling about it, but there could be so many other sensation novels on this list, and I expect the list to grow throughout the month. So I may be adding a little bit more to this prompt as Victober gets started. So Lucy's challenge is to read a novel with a female main character. And this is actually the prompt that I really got stuck on and that I just couldn't figure out for the longest time. There is a female main character in The Dead Secret by Wilkie Collins, so that can definitely do double duty and that can cover this prompt. But a book that has been on, I believe, at least 2 of my Victober TBRs is Romola by George Eliot. This book haunts me. It has been on my TBR for so long. It is her historical fiction that is set in the Renaissance in Italy, so it's set in Florence during the reign of Savonarola. And I feel like if I'm going to truly love any George Eliot book, it's going to be this one, but it just requires so much of me. I've started it before several times, and the writing is just really, really dense. I think that she is an author that you have to kind of work at to really enjoy. And during Victober, I'm trying to read a lot of books. And so when one of them feels like it takes quite a bit out of you, I think it puts a damper on the readathon as a whole. So I really am skeptical of this. I was talking to Kate Howe the other day, and she mentioned breaking up George Eliot and reading something else before Romola, and one of the suggestions that she had was Daniel Deronda, and I'm a little bit torn on that. So if I can find a used copy of Daniel Deronda, I think I will slot it in place of Romola just to read something else by George Eliot before I try this again. But hopefully I will eventually get to Romola and really enjoy it. I do feel like it's something that I should really love. So the group challenge is to read a popular Victorian classic that you haven't read yet. And popular can be interpreted in many different ways, but I decided to go for a book that haunts me just as much as Romola does. And it is a book that I have attempted to read before, and I have attempted it a couple of times. So this is technically not a book that I am reading for the first time, but I've never finished it, so I think it counts. That's Dracula by Bram Stoker. I feel like I should love Dracula, but I just don't. I've tried it twice. There is something about it that keeps me at arm's length. There is something about it that I just don't enjoy. So I am hoping that third time's the charm. I feel like everything about this really adds up to something I should enjoy. I love vampires, I love epistolary novels, and this book is kind of written through a series of letters and journal entries, and I just really love that as a format. And I really love a gothic setting. I feel like everything about Dracula is something that should appeal to me as a reader, and it just hasn't. So I wonder if my expectations for it are just a bit too high. So I'm hoping that I can go into this with fresh eyes and really just enjoy it for what it is this time around. But I'm looking forward to this. This is the one I'm torn the most on. Either I am the most excited about reading Dracula, or I am dreading it the most. So this is one that I am quite a bit torn on, but I hope that I really enjoy it this time around. I also really wanted to make one of my goals for Victober this year to read poetry, and one of the general prompts this year for Victober is to read aloud or to listen to an audiobook and have a book read aloud to you. And I think poetry works really well for that prompt. I am a big advocate of reading aloud. You all know this by now, I'm sure. But this is something that I think works really well for poetry. I think poetry needs to be read aloud sometimes, and I think it helps poetry. I think sometimes we think of poetry as a little bit more difficult to understand, and I think when you read it aloud, you get a little bit more out of it than you do when you're just reading it silently and looking at it on the page. So one thing that I am hoping to start this month, and I am definitely not going to finish it, is The Ring and the Book by Robert Browning. So Kate Howe and I are actually going to be buddy reading this, but it's going to be a very slow buddy read. So we're only going to try to get through 2 parts of this during Victober this month. But this is an epic poem about a murder that happened in Rome in the 1600s, and I just think it sounds really fascinating. I have long wanted to try the Brownings, and I really wanted to try Elizabeth Barrett Browning this month, so that may still happen. But I came across this at the used bookstore, and I thought it was a sign that Robert Browning is the Browning that I should try first. So hopefully Kate and I really enjoy this, and I hope that we enjoy taking it slowly. So this is one that I am really looking forward to starting this month. The other poet that I am hoping to try this month is Alfred Lord Tennyson. I have never read any Tennyson, or if I did, it was a very, very long time ago, and it certainly has not stuck with me. I am most excited, of course, about The Lady of Shalott. So that is something that I am really hoping to read this year. I'm really hoping to dive into this collection, and I just think that I'm probably going to like what I see from Alfred Lord Tennyson. He seems very kind of medieval focused, and I think the aesthetic of his writing will work very well for me. So many more books could have been included on this TBR, and I fully expect to maybe take some of these away and add others throughout the month. That's kind of what happened to me last year. So I'm not going to be too married to this. I'm just going to see where the month takes me. So I am really hopeful about all of these. I would love to know down below if you have read any of them and if you really recommend any of them. And I would love to know what is going on your Victober TBR this year. But that's going to be all for me today. I hope you're all having a great week. Happy reading. Happy Victober. Goodbye.